Welcome to the River Valley Church podcast. We are a community of faith that is interested in practicing the way of Jesus together. Each week, you'll hear messages from our Sunday gatherings that are meant to help you follow Jesus in your everyday life.
So this morning we're continuing on in Matthew. We're going to be in chapter 7, verses 13 through 20. If you'd like to follow along, it's also going to be on the screen. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Amanda. And good morning again. It's great to see you this morning. My name is Justin. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, I would love that opportunity right after our service. Just to catch us up to speed, our church has been in a series through Jesus' famous set of teachings known as the Sermon on the Mount. And I said a couple weeks ago that we're sort of rounding third base, and so we're making our way towards the tail end of chapter 7, and we're looking at what Jesus has to say. Up until now, he's had a lot to say. He's had a lot of instructions for his followers, and he's going to make a slight shift that we're going to see in a minute. But first, something I learned this week. I've been on this kick lately of just sharing some things I've learned. But the first thing I learned a few things. The first one is that researchers estimate that the average adult makes around somewhere in the neighborhood of 35,000 decisions every single day. 35,000. Now, most of these decisions are small and are very insignificant, especially in the moment. Like, you might not even think twice about hitting snooze on your phone or getting up in the morning. If you're curious, my snooze goes for 9 minutes, and I hit it twice today, which came with some consequences, but these are the choices we make. Other questions abound all the time. Things like, what are we going to wear? One of the interesting things that I found out was that out of the 35,000 decisions that we all make on any average given day, over 200 of those are specifically related to choices around the area of food. And I was like, that makes sense for Westerners, for sure. There are other decisions and choices that we make that actually have the ability to change the trajectory of our lives. Things like questions that must be answered at times. Which college will I attend? Who will I marry? Should I take that job? Should I move? And if you're wondering the answer to that last question, it is most definitely no, you should not. We want you to stay. Some decisions determine not just where we're going for the rest of our day today, but some decisions actually shape who we're actually becoming as people. And that's exactly what I think is going on in our passage today with Jesus in chapter 7 of Matthew. And as he brings the Sermon on the Mount towards its conclusion, Jesus is no longer simply just teaching his followers information to be attained. He's calling his followers to make a response. And he does this after presenting them with a series of choices. In this section of Matthew chapter 7, you see groups of two. There are two gates. There are two roads. There are two kinds of prophets. There are two kinds of trees. There are two kinds of fruit. And we're only going to spend time talking about two types of paths today because there's just not enough time. But I actually shared this in the first service that there's so much content in this particular section, and there's so much important things going on here, specifically when it comes to the area of false teaching that is still rampant in the church today, that I probably will end up doing some sort of little video this coming week. So be on the lookout for that. There's just not enough time to get to everything here today. But I do want to focus in on the first thing that he's talking about, which are the two paths. Behind every image that Jesus gives his followers is essentially the same question: which way will you choose? It's as if Jesus is saying, you've heard my teachings, you're aware of what I've said, now what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? See, the Sermon on the Mount was never meant to be admired from a distance. Jesus' teachings here demand a decision. And the reality is that today, every single one of us that are gathered here in this room, every single one of us that were in the last service together, are already on a path. You're already on a road out of the two roads. The question isn't whether you're on a road. The question today that we need to ask ourselves is, are you on the road that leads to life? Or are you on the road that leads to destruction? Jesus is only giving us two options. In his classic book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll famously tells the story of the main character, Alice, who, arriving at a fork in the road where she famously asked the Cheshire Cat, "Which way ought I to go from here?" To which the cat replied, "Well, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to." Alice then answered, "Well, I don't much care where." To which the cat responds, "Then it doesn't matter which way you go." I'd like to insert that Jesus disagrees with Alice because according to Jesus, not every road leads to the same destination. Jesus is very clear and specific where he says one road leads you to life while the other will lead you to destruction. And one of the most desperate needs that I think we have as followers of Jesus and in the church today is direction. We need direction. Verse 13 and 14, picking up back on this spot, says, "Enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life. And those who find it are few." Here we see Jesus presenting a very clear illustration of two paths for his disciples, for his learners, for his followers. The first path that he describes is a very wide path. It's very broad. It's the one that's easiest to get on. It's the easiest to access. It's sort of like, without traffic, it's like a 6-lane highway that you're driving on. And there's plenty of room, for people, unless you live in New York, to drive on the 6-lane highway. Plenty of room. And Jesus also says that it's also the easiest way. And once you get access, it's the road that has the least amount of resistance. Jesus says that many people are on that road. And it's the road that he describes as leading ultimately to destruction. But then Jesus describes another path, another road, one which has a gate that sits very narrow. And it shows us that this gate, this road, is hard. And it's hard to get into. And it's a hard way to go once you get on it. I was looking at one of the words associated in the Greek with this word for hard this week. It's actually a word that refers to the same thing in Jesus' time as an olive press. An olive press. It's the idea of being squeezed or compressed. And that's how Jesus is describing this way. Jesus is so clear that the sanctified life is a road that is narrow. It's a road that is difficult. And then he says that there are actually few who find it, who find this path. But for those who do, it is the way that ultimately, though it be hard, though it be difficult, it's the way that ends up leading to true life. So there's a wide path and there's a narrow path. And Jesus is asking his followers, which path are you going to take? At the beginning of the start of our series, we said that Jesus is primarily gathered on a northern hillside near the Sea of Galilee, giving the Sermon on the Mount to who? His disciples. There were other people around. We can see that in the text. But Jesus is primarily giving the Sermon on the Mount to Christians, to people who are already on the narrow way. But it's interesting to me that he's warning his already disciples that they must stay on the path. They must stay on the path. And he reminds them that it will be a difficult path. It will be a narrow gate. Malcolm Muggeridge once said, "Only dead fish swim with the current." I thought that was pretty intriguing. Only dead fish swim with the current. See, the broad road requires very little effort. It simply follows the current of our day, our current thought process, the narrative of society, the way of the world. Maybe you've heard these phrases, but the current in our culture is strong. It's really strong. But the narrow road often means swimming upstream against the current, against popular opinion, against our very real sinful nature and our sinful desires. Sometimes it means swimming against the crowd itself. Last week I took a fun little trip with my son Soren. It was a canoe trip that the Walpole School organized, and it was really fun. I took the day off and went with him out here on the Connecticut River. Here we are. And it was beautiful that day. And we were with a pretty big group and no humidity. The sun was out, no bugs. It was just a pristine spring day in New England. And they told us before we started, we started at like this little base camp on the river of the Connecticut River. And they told us that, hey, the current right now is at a pace that like if you were to just take like a brisk walk, that's sort of the current of the river right now. And so, we get out there and sure enough, I mean, it really took very little. We didn't even have to paddle necessarily if we didn't want to. We could have just floated down the river and, they had us float down the river or paddle down the river to land at a certain spot where we, made our way back to the camp. And it was a great day, a great trip. I remember as we were getting going, one of the river guides basically said, "Hey, look, when you get down to the end where the big orange sign is and you're going to pull your canoe off and we're all going to eat lunch there, it would behoove you to stay on the right-hand side of the river bend, because if you're caught out on the other side with the current that's currently going on, it's not going to be fun for you to try to get over to where we are on the right-hand side." So I was so proud. This doesn't always happen, friends. I follow directions. I know it's hard to believe that it could be anything other than that. But there was one poor father and daughter who were all the way over on the other side, and they didn't realize how close they were to where we were all going to land for lunch. And man, I felt so bad. It was so painful to watch them on the other side trying their hardest to go against the current and to try to get over to where we all were already had been on the shore for about 5 minutes waiting and getting ready to eat lunch. And at one point, I turned around and I see them, and their canoe is backwards, and they are with all of their might trying to, paddle against the current. And eventually they made it, but they had to park way down, and they had to walk all the way back to where we were. And if they had just listened to where they needed to get over on the right-hand side, I felt like saying, even I could figure that out, But no, I didn't. I just let them do their thing. But I got thinking about our passage this week as it relates to that idea. As I said before, we didn't even have to paddle to get moving on this river. Soren and I mean, you can see him. He's not even paddling there. We're just drifting. And anyone can drift downstream. It's pretty easy to do that, especially on a moving river. Anybody can do that. But I submit to you that it takes intentionality to follow Jesus. It takes the situation of the father and the daughter actually in our walk with Christ. Jesus explains that that's what it will look like. I want to point out 3 things about this passage that I noticed this past week. The first thing is this: before we actually enter onto the path that Jesus is talking about, we see that the gate to the path is narrow from the beginning. I think it's really important to see that. It's narrow from the start. Verse 13 shows us that. And John chapter 10 says something very interesting as related to this idea. It says, so Jesus again said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Friends, it's important for us to see today that Jesus is both the gate and he is the path. He is the narrow way by which we come through the door, and he is also the journey when we get over. And the narrowness that he describes, if I could use the word exclusivity of what he's saying about himself in his own claims, is the means to this depth of life that he's describing when it comes to the narrow path. See, we live in a world today that proclaims just the exact opposite of what Jesus said. We live in a world today that very loudly and boldly proclaims that all paths lead to the same destination. All belief systems lead to the same end destination and goal. And Jesus would like a word. We, as you know, most of us here probably, live in New England. I was just having a conversation here before we started the service. Did you know that in 2009 was the year that New England took the title of least church region in the nation, and we stole that title from the Pacific Northwest in 2009. Some people are like, I'm surprised by that. I thought it was like that even before. No, we actually, statistically, that's when it happened. 2009 is when we took that unfortunate title. We are the least church region in the nation. We are in a place that feels like it is almost defined by things like Subaru vehicles and coexist bumper stickers. This is where we live. This is the people that we're among. And I would say that there is a very strong sense of what we might call pluralism. Pluralism is the idea that all paths and all beliefs and all gods lead to the same destination. Enter Jesus, where he says there is only one way. John 14:6 famously says, Jesus said to them, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. It's one of his harder sayings. Jesus' words, by definition, are exclusive. Whenever I have conversations or this comes on topic of I just overhear or see this idea that Christians are so hateful, they only believe that there's only one way. And you know, friends, this is my tactic. I didn't say it. I didn't make this up. Jesus said this. Blame Jesus. I'm okay with that. I didn't make this up. I'm simply trying to figure out if what Jesus said about himself is true. And I'd encourage you to do the same. Jesus has a very exclusive call. It's a very narrow gate, but it's the gate and the path that ultimately leads to life. And so in one sense, Jesus' words are exclusive. You're correct. But in the sense that he is the only way, Had you ever thought about this before? Jesus can say that he's the only way because Jesus is the only one who decided to come down to be with humanity, to break into our brokenness and our shame, to take it to a cross and to be buried. He died and was resurrected on the third day. What other God, what other belief system do you have that did that? And when you can come up with one, then I think you'd be okay to say, this road also leads to life as well. But Jesus is the only one who did that. That's why he can make this authoritative, exclusive claim. He is the one that says he is how we enter the gate, and now he is the one by how we live. The second thing I want you to see is that the narrow way suggests to us the idea of surrender. Surrender. In other words, you and I, in order to enter the gate, to get on the path, have to lay some things aside to come in to this narrow way that he's describing. It reminds me of the security TSA checkpoints at the airport, which I loathe, by the way, just so you know, if you wanted to know something about me. It's one of the things I dislike the most is not the people, but TSA in general. The amount of things I've had destroyed by that organization. And sorry, I'm feeling a little emotional about it here. It's true. I have friends, musician friends of mine. It never fails. They'll put a pedal board together for a guitar that they're taking out on the road, and they get it on the destination where they're going. They open it up, absolutely destroyed. It's just, anyway, we need reform. That's my comment card to the TSA. But do you notice that whenever you go to the TSA or you're going on a flight, you have to. Everybody goes in the same way. Everybody goes through the narrow gate. Everybody goes through the gate where you have to get rid of some things. You have to take belts off. You have to get your wallets out. You have to put your electronic devices away. Do you ever notice? It drives me crazy. It changes every other week. Like depending on the airport that you go to, I'm taking my shoes off. I'm getting ready, and then I finally, after I get them off, have a TSA agent come over. Oh, you don't have to take your shoes off here. Okay, thank you. You have to surrender things to get through that gate. And I want to get to where I'm going. So of course, everybody's going to do the same thing. They're going to go through the gate. Some of you are going to get pulled over. They're going to do a little extra check for you. Jesus is basically saying the same thing. Like, if you want to get through the gate, you have to surrender to me. What is the price of admission? To get through the security checkpoint? For Jesus, you have to give everything to him. Your whole life. Matthew 16:24 says, then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. The narrow way. Not only is it narrow from the start, but the narrow way will require you to surrender some things. Well, the narrow way also speaks of suffering. This is the part of the Christian life that we don't love to talk about. But it's the truth of the narrow way. The narrow way brings about and speaks often of a life of suffering at times. And did you catch that in verse 14 where it says, it kind of illuminates this part? It says in verse 14, for the gate is narrow and the way is, what? Hard. We don't like to think about these things. The way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it, and I think it's a result of it being hard, are few. There are few because it's hard. Hard to be pressed, to be crushed. Who wants that? The narrow way is a fight. It's a struggle. It's not easy. You know, we've been in this series this is our 18th Sunday, going through the Sermon on the Mount. Crazy. And the easy way, it really is, it feels a lot better at first, right? Like the easy way. Listen, it's easier to manage your feelings of anger than it is to pursue reconciliation. I think Jesus said something about that early on in our series. It's easier to indulge in lust than it is to pursue purity. It's easier to get even than it is to love your enemies. It's easier to seek the applause of men rather than to serve in secret. It's easier to worry than it is to trust. It's easier to judge than it is to examine. It's easier to treat people how they've treated us rather than practice the golden rule, which is to treat people how you wish that they would treat you. It's easier to build our lives on convenience rather than obedience. It's easier to hear Jesus' words than to put them into practice. Friends, it's easier to follow the crowd than it is to walk on this narrow path. Jesus' message to his followers was not one that was easy. In fact, it was hard. And maybe you're here today and you hear what I'm saying and you hear what I'm describing and you see what Jesus is laying out and you think to yourself, well, man, I don't like that. I don't want that. Like, that does not sound appealing in the least. The narrow way, it's hard to enter. It's hard to walk. It's difficult to go. There's suffering involved. Justin, it sounds horrendous. But I'd like to submit to you, if that's your thought process, that you're forgetting one key point. You're forgetting one key that makes all the difference. And that is, you're forgetting where that will lead you to, the destination. You're forgetting where all the trials and tribulations will end you up. The destination of the broad path, Jesus says, the wide gate will eventually lead you, maybe even now, to destruction. Some people are living hell on earth. Some people will spend an eternity apart from Jesus. The destination of the narrow gate and the hard path, the harder direction, Jesus says eventually brings life and life to the full. The broad path is easy because the broad path, the wide gate, the wide road, it really asks nothing of you. I mean, you can get on the broad path and the road of least resistance. Nobody's gonna bother you on that path, probably, right? It's gonna be easy. Maybe some of you are coming from a background where Jesus did save you off of the broad path and you're entered the narrow gate and you're on the harder path and direction with your life. But it's so easy to slip back onto the easy road. It's so easy to let ourselves be fooled into thinking that the path of least resistance is going to produce the results that are just easy. And Jesus has something else to say. So the question today for us is, which path are you on? It's not a question of what path will you get on. It's like you're already on one. Which one is it? And today, Jesus stands before you and me and invites us yet again to come to him, but you can only come through the security checkpoint by giving everything you have to him. Surrender. Jesus stands before us and invites us through the narrow gate, not towards restriction, but towards life. And the good news for you and me today is that the one who calls us to walk that difficult road also walks with us every step of the way. There is no other belief system. There's no other little g God that can do what Jesus does for you and I. Alyssa mentioned it earlier today. There's no other system out there where our God has come down. Every other belief system, every other God is one that you have to reach up to make happy with you, to achieve, to work hard for, to keep a scoreboard. That's what makes Christianity different. That's what changes everything.
We're so glad you tuned in today. To learn more about River Valley Church, head over to rivervalleychurch.com, where we'd love to help you take some next steps.